Hello, my fearless friends, and welcome back to another night of spine-tingling tales. Tonight, we're diving into stories so eerie they'll make you question what's lurking in the shadows of your own home. So grab a blanket, dim the lights, and get ready to embark on a chilling journey into the unknown. Let's begin. Story 1. The top floor. Anna had always considered herself a pragmatic person. Logic and reason were her shields against the irrational fears of the world. When she found the apartment on the 13th floor of a new building, it felt like a dream come true. Her friends teased her about the number, but Anna wasn't superstitious. "It's just a number," she'd say with a dismissive wave. The building was newly constructed on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by lush greenery. It was quiet, with few residents, a haven for someone like Anna who craved solitude. For the first few weeks, everything was perfect. Her evenings were spent gazing out of the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling park below. The city's noise felt like a distant memory, and Anna couldn't have been happier, but then came the elevator glitches. At first, it was subtle. The display panel would flicker when she pressed the button for her floor. Occasionally, it would pause mid-ride, as if reconsidering its destination, before continuing to the 13th floor. Anna shrugged it off. New buildings always have teething problems, she reasoned. But one night, as she returned home late, something happened that she couldn't rationalize. She stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the 13th floor, and leaned back against the mirrored wall. The ascent began smoothly, but halfway up, the elevator jolted to a stop. The lights flickered, and a soft, almost imperceptible hum filled the air. Anna glanced at the panel, expecting to see the familiar 13. Instead, the number 14 glowed faintly. Her heart skipped a beat. The doors slid open, revealing a corridor unlike any she'd ever seen in the building. The air was damp and heavy, carrying a metallic tang that made her stomach churn. The walls were covered in faded, peeling wallpaper, marked with strange symbols that looked like they'd been scratched in desperation. Dim, flickering lights cast long shadows, creating the illusion of movement where there was none. Anna hesitated. Her instinct screamed at her to stay inside the elevator, but a strange compulsion urged her to step out. Just as she leaned forward, a figure emerged at the end of the corridor. It was humanoid, but its movements were jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on tangled strings. The figure turned slowly toward her, revealing hollow, blackened eyes. Anna gasped and stumbled backward, slamming the elevator button repeatedly. The doors closed just as the figure began to glide toward her, its steps eerily silent. The ride to the 13th floor felt like an eternity, and when the doors finally opened, she bolted to her apartment, locking the door behind her. Shaking, she called her neighbor, Mrs. Ivanova, who had lived in the building since it opened. Mrs. Ivanova listened quietly before saying, "You're not the first, dear. The 14th floor, it doesn't exist, not officially. But those who've seen it, they always leave." From that night on, Anna avoided the elevator. She took the stairs, even though they seemed to stretch endlessly. Sometimes, she felt eyes watching her from the shadows. The whispers started soon after, soft, unintelligible murmurs that grew louder as she climbed. The building felt alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy. Anna finally decided to move. As she packed her belongings, she felt a presence behind her. Turning slowly, she saw her reflection in the window. But it wasn't her. The figure staring back had hollow eyes and a twisted smile, its lips moving silently as if whispering the words she couldn't hear. Story 2. The whispers in the woods. Elena had always been a city girl, but when she inherited her grandmother's cottage deep in the forest, something about the serene isolation called to her. It was a chance to escape the chaos of city life and reconnect with her roots. The cottage itself was charming, if a bit run down. It was nestled between tall pines, with a small garden and a creek running nearby. The villagers warned her to be cautious. "Don't go into the woods at night," they said, "their face is serious." Elena smiled politely, dismissing their warnings as old superstitions. She was a rational woman, after all, and the idea of haunted woods felt like something out of a campfire tale. Her first weeks were idyllic. By day, she cleaned the cottage, planted flowers, and wandered the trails near the creek. By night, she read by the fire, lulled to sleep by the sounds of the forest. But soon, she began noticing strange things. It started with faint whispers at dusk. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the sounds grew more distinct, soft voices just on the edge of hearing. They seemed to come from the woods, calling her name in tones that were both familiar and foreign. One evening, as she sat on the porch, the whispers grew louder. They sounded closer, as if the source was just beyond the tree line. Goosebumps prickled her skin, but curiosity got the better of her. She grabbed a flashlight and ventured toward the sound. The woods at night were alive in a way she hadn't expected. Shadows danced and shifted with every step she took. The flashlight's beam seemed to falter, barely piercing the darkness. The whispers guided her deeper, weaving through the trees like an unseen thread. "Elena," the voices called, soft and sing-song. She stopped abruptly when her flashlight illuminated something unusual. A circle of mushrooms stood in a small clearing, their caps glowing faintly under the moonlight. In the center of the circle lay an old, weathered locket. Against her better judgment, Elena bent to pick it up. The moment her fingers touched the locket, the forest fell silent. The whispers stopped, replaced by a suffocating stillness. Then, the air grew colder, and a low, guttural laugh echoed through the trees. She spun around, her flashlight flickering wildly. Shadows began to coalesce, forming figures that seemed to step out from the darkness itself. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their mouths moved, but no sound came out. Panicked, Elena turned to run, but found herself disoriented. The forest seemed to shift around her, the trees closing in as if alive. She stumbled into the clearing again, the circle of mushrooms now surrounded by the shadowy figures. They stood motionless, watching her with eyes that seemed to pierce her very soul. "Elena," one of them whispered, its voice a low rasp. "Leave me alone," she screamed, clutching the locket tightly. The figures advanced, their forms flickering like candle flames. Just as one reached out, the locket grew warm in her hand. A blinding light erupted from it, sending the shadows shrieking back into the darkness. When the light faded, Elena found herself alone in the clearing, the circle of mushrooms undisturbed. She ran back to the cottage, locking every door and window. That night, she dreamt of her grandmother, who whispered, "The locket will protect you, but only if you stay out of the woods." The whispers continued in the days that followed, but Elena never ventured into the forest again. The locket remained around her neck, its warmth a constant reminder of her close call. Sometimes, she'd glance at the tree line and see shadows moving just out of sight, waiting for her to return. Story 3, The Reflection. Maxim's apartment was his sanctuary. As a history professor, he had a deep appreciation for the past, and his living space reflected that. Every corner was adorned with artifacts from different eras, a grandfather clock that chimed with a deep resonance, shelves of ancient books with worn leather covers, and a collection of antique trinkets he'd picked up at flea markets and auctions. But his favorite pieces were the ones with a story, the ones that seemed to carry a piece of their previous owner's life within them. It was on one of these treasure hunts that Maxim found the mirror. The market was unusually empty that day, the air thick with an incoming storm. He wandered past stalls of worn furniture and tarnished jewelry until his eyes landed on the mirror. Its frame was unlike anything he'd ever seen, carved from a dark, almost black wood, with intricate patterns that seemed to shift subtly under the light. The seller, an elderly man with deep-set eyes and a voice like gravel, noticed Maxim's interest. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the man rasped. "But be careful. This mirror doesn't just reflect. It reveals." Maxim chuckled. "What does it reveal?" "Whatever it wants you to see," the man replied cryptically, intrigued. Maxim purchased the mirror and brought it home. He hung it in his bedroom, where the soft light from his bedside lamp cast shadows that danced across its surface. At first, it was just a mirror, a striking addition to his collection. But as the days passed, Maxim began to notice peculiarities. The first incident occurred late one night. As Maxim prepared for bed, he glanced at the mirror and noticed something strange. His reflection lingered for a fraction of a second after he moved. He chalked it up to exhaustion, but the next evening, it happened again. This time, the reflection smiled faintly, an expression he hadn't made. The occurrences became more frequent. Shadows flitted behind him in the mirror's surface, though his room was empty. The reflection began to mimic him less and less, sometimes standing perfectly still while he moved. One night, it waved at him while his arms remained at his sides. Terrified but fascinated, Maxim started documenting the phenomena. He set up a camera to record the mirror overnight. The next morning, he hesitated before watching the footage. When he finally pressed play, his blood ran cold. Around 3 a.m., the reflection in the mirror began to move on its own. It stepped forward, pressing its hands against the glass as if trying to push through. Maxim decided he couldn't keep the mirror any longer. He covered it with a heavy cloth and planned to take it back to the market the next day. That night, he awoke to the sound of soft, rhythmic tapping.